granddaughter won't go near her own mother. She's 7 years old and she flinches when her mother walks into the room. Last week, she pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand while we were sitting on the porch swing, and she whispered, "Grandpa, look in the garage, behind the red toolbox. Please don't tell Mom." I waited until midnight. What I found in that garage made my hands shake so badly I had to sit down on the cold concrete floor. But I need to back up, because this story doesn't start in a garage. It starts 14 months ago when my wife of 41 years, Carol, had a stroke in our kitchen while she was unloading the dishwasher. She was 63 years old. She made it to the hospital, but she never came home. I sat beside her bed for 4 days, holding her hand, talking to her, and then she was gone. Just like that. The woman who had been the center of my life since I was 22 years old. I'm 68. We'd lived in the same house in Knoxville, Tennessee for over 30 years, a 3-bedroom brick ranch on a quiet street with a dogwood tree in the front yard that Carol planted herself the spring after we moved in. After she died, I rattled around in that house like a marble in an empty can. Our son, Derek, lived 40 minutes away in Maryville with his wife, Shauna, and their daughter, Abby. Our daughter, Pam, had moved to Portland years back for work and built her whole life out there. About 3 weeks after Carol's funeral, Derek and Shauna came over for dinner. I'd made spaghetti, the only thing I can manage reliably. We were sitting at the table when Shauna set down her fork and said very carefully, like she'd been rehearsing, "We've been thinking, and we don't feel right about you being here alone. It's too much house for one person." I started to say I was fine, but Derek jumped in. "Dad, we want to move in, just for a while, help you get back on your feet. Shauna can work from here and Abby would love spending time with you." Part of me was relieved. The silence in the house at night was the kind that sits on your chest. And Abby, she was my heart. She'd always been close to me, that kid. Spent half her summers following me around the garden, asking questions about everything. So they moved in. The first month was actually good. Having Abby around helped more than I can say. She'd come find me in the mornings and want to make scrambled eggs together, or she'd drag me outside to look at something in the yard. Derek seemed genuinely glad to be there. He'd sit with me after dinner and we'd watch baseball and talk about nothing in particular, which was exactly what I needed. But Shauna. I started to notice things with Shauna. She reorganized the garage without asking me. That's where I'd kept Carol's garden tools exactly as Carol had left them, and one afternoon I went out there and they'd been shoved into a bin in the corner. When I said something, Shauna said she was just making space, that it would be better for everyone. She said it in that tone that's so reasonable it makes you feel unreasonable for objecting. She started handling my mail. I'd come downstairs and find her at the kitchen table going through envelopes. "Just making sure you don't miss anything important," she said. "Derek says you've been forgetful." I hadn't said anything to Derek about being forgetful. I wasn't particularly forgetful. But then I started to be. I'd walk into a room and lose the thread of why I went there. I'd forget whether I'd taken my blood pressure medication. I'm on lisinopril, have been for years, so Shauna started laying it out for me with my morning coffee. I'd lose words mid-sentence. Derek started looking at me with this worried expression, and one night I heard him on the phone out on the back porch saying something about how bad it's gotten and we may need to look at options sooner than we thought. I stood at the kitchen window and listened, and I felt cold all over. Abby had changed too. She used to chatter at breakfast, tell me about her dreams, want to show me things on her tablet. Now she ate quietly, eyes on her plate, and would glance at Shauna the way you glance at a weather vane, trying to figure out which way the wind was blowing. When Shauna left the room, Abby would relax a little. When Shauna came back, she'd go still again. One afternoon, I found Abby sitting on the back steps alone. I sat down next to her. "You doing okay, sweetheart?" She shrugged. She picked at the rubber edge of her sneaker. "Abby." She looked up at me, and her eyes were way too serious for a 7-year-old. "Grandpa, do you think you're going to have to go to a home?" My stomach dropped. "What? Who said that?" "I heard Mom on the phone." She looked down again. "She said you couldn't live alone and that it wasn't safe." "I'm not alone. You're here." She said that's the problem. I didn't know what to say to that. I told her I wasn't going anywhere and not to worry, but I was worried because something was wrong and I couldn't get a clear grip on what it was. My thoughts felt like they were coming through gauze. I'd have good hours and then hours where I couldn't have told you what day it was. 3 days after that conversation on the steps, Abby pressed the note into my hand on the porch swing. I waited until the house was quiet. Derek was on a work trip to Nashville. He's a regional manager for a building supply chain and travels a few days a month. Shauna had gone to bed around 10. I lay in my room until just after midnight, then got up in the dark and went out to the garage through the side door. I moved the red toolbox. Behind it, pushed against the wall and partially covered by an old dropcloth, was a plastic storage bin with a lid. I pried it open. File folders, envelopes, documents. I sat down on the floor right there. The first thing I pulled out was a bank statement. Not from my regular account at First Tennessee, but from a joint account I had no memory of opening. My name was on it, and Shauna's. 11 months of transfers. Small ones at first, 300 here, 500 there, then larger. A total of over $22,000 moved out of my primary checking account into this one, with Shauna listed as a co-owner with full access. I set that aside and kept going. A durable power of attorney document, signed with what looked like my signature, giving Shauna authority over my financial and medical decisions if I were determined to be incapacitated. I have a real power of attorney on file with my attorney, one that designates Derek and Pam together, that Carol and I set up years ago. I would never have changed it without talking to Pam. I would never have given Shauna that authority alone. Another document. A new deed of trust with a lien filed against my house. My house, which Carol and I paid off in 2019. And then, at the bottom of the bin, a prescription bottle with my name on it, prescribed by a doctor I'd never heard of, at a practice I'd never been to, for a benzodiazepine called clonazepam, high dose. There was also a second bottle, unlabeled, with small white pills inside, and a handwritten note on a notepad that just said levels, check Friday, keep consistent. I'm not a doctor, but I know what clonazepam is. It's a sedative. It's used for anxiety and seizures, and it will absolutely make you confused and foggy and unable to hold on to time. It will make you feel like you're losing your mind if someone gives it to you without telling you what it is. The coffee every morning. The pills she laid out for me, she'd always turned slightly away when she did it, always said, your blood pressure medication. And I'd assumed she meant the lisinopril. I'd assumed. I sat on that concrete floor for a long time, long enough that my legs went numb. When I went back inside, I almost walked past Abby's door. Then I stopped. I pushed it open a crack. She was awake. She was lying in the dark with her eyes open, and she turned her head when I opened the door. Did you find it? She whispered. I came and sat on the edge of her bed. Yes, I said. Abby, how did you know it was there? I saw her put the box back one time. She didn't see me. She pulled her blanket up. I looked inside. I didn't understand all of it, but the medicine bottles scared me. You've been so... She stopped. You're not like you used to be, Grandpa. Before. You used to remember everything. I took her hand. You were very brave to tell me. Is Dad part of it? There it was. The question I'd been pushing away since I found the account with Shauna's name on it. Derek knew about every dollar I had. He'd sat with me when we met with the financial planner after Carol died. He knew what accounts I had, what my house was worth, what my life insurance policy paid out. I don't know yet, I said. But I'm going to find out. The next morning, I did everything as normal as I could manage. I came down at my usual time. Shauna was already in the kitchen, and she poured my coffee and set it in front of me with a smile. And I smiled back, and I poured that coffee down the bathroom drain the moment she stepped out of the room. I took my actual lisinopril from the bottle in my medicine cabinet, the one from my real pharmacy, the one my own doctor had prescribed, and I ate a bowl of cereal I poured myself. My head was clearer than it had been in months. I called Pam first. She's 2 time zones away and I hadn't wanted to worry her, but I told her everything. She didn't say a word for almost a full minute after I finished. Dad, I'm getting on a plane. Not yet. Let me talk to Raymond first. Raymond Whitfield is my attorney. I've known him since Derek was in Little League. He handled our estate planning, our wills, the deed to the house. I need to understand what I'm actually dealing with before anyone shows up here. Dad. Pam. 2 days, I promise I'll call you every night. I called Raymond's office the moment it opened. His receptionist put me through right away when I said it was urgent. I drove to his office that morning. Shauna asked where I was going, and I said I had a doctor's appointment, which wasn't entirely untrue. I planned to stop there too. Raymond spread the documents out on his desk and went through them slowly. I watched his face change. Robert. He caught himself. He's known me long enough that I'm just Bob to him. Bob. This power of attorney is a forgery. I have your valid POA on file. This signature has been replicated. It's close, but the notarization is fraudulent. I can see that just looking at the seal. He tapped the lien document. And this. This was filed against your property without your knowledge. This is wire fraud. This is potentially felony forgery. He leaned back and looked at me over his glasses. How are you feeling? Physically. Better than I have in months, I said. Since this morning. He nodded slowly. Tell me about the medication. I told him about the bottles. He picked up his phone and called someone while I sat there, a colleague, a retired prosecutor he still consulted with. When he hung up, he said, we need to go to the police, and you need to see your actual doctor today. You need blood work. My regular physician is Dr. Callahan. I've been seeing her for almost 15 years. She got me in that same afternoon. I brought the unlabeled bottle with me. She looked at those pills under a light and said she wanted to run a full tox panel. If someone has been giving you clonazepam without your knowledge, it would absolutely produce the symptoms you're describing, she said. She kept her voice even, clinical, but her eyes were angry. Memory issues, confusion, time distortion, difficulty with word recall, all of it, and at your age, combined with grief and stress, it would be very easy for another doctor or a layperson to say it looked like early cognitive decline. She drew blood and told me results would be back within 48 hours. She also sat down and administered a brief cognitive screening right then, the kind they use to assess dementia. I scored well, she showed me the numbers. Normal range, above average in several areas. There's nothing wrong with your brain, Bob, she said. Whatever someone has been telling you or telling others is not supported by any clinical evidence I can find. I drove home steadier than I'd felt in months. That evening, Derek came back from Nashville. He came in through the garage, kissed Shauna, and then came to find me in the living room where I was watching the news. He sat down and looked at me with that same worried expression. Dad, Shauna says you've been a little off today. Leaving the house without telling anyone, not taking your medication. I looked at my son. I looked at the face I'd watched grow from a baby to a man. And I thought about the phone call I'd overheard on the back porch. We may need to look at options sooner than we thought. And I thought about Abby lying awake in the dark. I'm fine, son, I said, just tired. He patted my knee and went to help Shauna with dinner. I went to my room and texted Pam, still on schedule. Raymond is moving fast. The next day, while Derek was at work and Shauna was on a call upstairs, I photographed every document in that bin. Uploaded everything to a cloud account Pam helped me set up, one Shauna knew nothing about. Then I put everything back exactly as I'd found it. Raymond had already been in contact with the Knox County Sheriff's Office by then. He'd spoken to a detective in the Financial Crimes Unit, a woman named Detective Albright, who agreed to review the evidence before making any moves. Raymond was worried that if Shauna felt cornered, she might destroy the documents or transfer whatever was left in that joint account. That night I lay in bed listening to Derek and Shauna talk through the wall. Their voices were low and urgent. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard enough. He went to the doctor. What if they run tests? We need to move faster. And then Derek's voice quieter. I told you it was getting too complicated. If he figures it out, and Shauna cutting him off, he won't. He's not capable of figuring anything out anymore. That's the whole point. My son. My son said that. I turned over and stared at the ceiling and thought about the day Derek was born. I thought about teaching him to ride a bike on this very street. I thought about him crying at Carol's funeral, real tears. And I had held him and thought at least I still had him. I didn't sleep. 2 mornings later, Detective Albright called Raymond and told him they had everything they needed. The fraudulent power of attorney, the forged lien, the unauthorized account transfers. The tox panel had come back and showed significant levels of clonazepam in my blood, despite the fact that it had never been prescribed to me by any doctor in the state of Tennessee. My blood work also showed traces of the second compound, something used as a sleep aid, mild but consistent, enough to compound the confusion from the clonazepam. She said to make sure Abby and I were away from the house when they came. I called Pam and told her to drive, not fly. I needed time. I told her to stop at the Cracker Barrel on I-40 and wait for me there. I packed a bag for myself and knocked on Abby's door. She was doing homework at her desk. She looked up at me. "Is it time?" she asked, like she'd known this moment was coming. "Yes, sweetheart, it's time. Pack a bag, just for a few days." She didn't ask where we were going. She just opened her closet and started packing. 7 years old. We drove out while Shauna was on a call in the back bedroom. I didn't leave a note. I turned right out of the driveway and didn't look in the rearview mirror. We met Pam at the Cracker Barrel and Abby climbed into her aunt's arms like she'd been waiting to let go of something very heavy. We were eating soup when Raymond called. Then Detective Albright called directly. Shauna had been taken into custody at the house. Derek had been arrested at his office in Maryville. The bin in the garage had been seized as evidence. The joint account had been frozen. I put down my spoon and pressed my hand over my eyes for a moment. Pam put her hand on my arm. Abby was watching me carefully. "It's over," I said. "Both of them." Abby nodded. She picked up her grilled cheese and took a bite like we'd just finished talking about something ordinary. The weeks after were hard in ways I hadn't anticipated. Shauna had told Derek that I was planning to change my will to leave everything to a charity, that Tyler, she'd been telling him I favored Abby's future over his family, that I was being manipulated by Pam and planning to cut him out. It was a lie, but Derek had believed it. Or he'd wanted to believe it because it made what they were doing feel justified. People are good at that. Derek cooperated with prosecutors almost immediately. His attorney told him cooperation was his only option. He sat across from me in a conference room at Raymond's office about 6 weeks after the arrest, and he could barely look at me. "Dad, I am so sorry. I know it doesn't fix anything." "No," I said, "it doesn't. She convinced me you were losing your mind. She showed me things, said you'd said things, and I wanted to believe her because it was easier than believing you were fine and we were wrong." I looked at my son for a long moment. The grief I felt wasn't anger. It was something quieter and worse than anger. "You heard me on that back porch, talking about your own father like I was a problem to be managed. Like I was already gone." He didn't answer. He just lowered his head. Shauna was indicted on 9 counts including wire fraud, elder financial exploitation, forgery, and criminal administration of a controlled substance without consent, which in Tennessee carries serious felony charges. Derek pled guilty to 2 counts of financial exploitation and 1 count of fraud, in exchange for testimony against Shauna and a reduced sentence that included significant community service, restitution, and probation. The money was recovered. The lien was vacated. The fraudulent POA was struck from any record it had touched. Abby came to live with Pam in Portland temporarily while the legal proceedings sorted themselves out. She cried when she left, and she hugged me for a long time in the driveway. "I'll come back for Thanksgiving," she said into my shoulder. "I'll make the turkey," I said. She pulled back and looked at me very seriously. "Grandpa, you don't know how to make a turkey." "I'll figure it out." She almost smiled. It was the first time in months I'd seen anything close to a smile on her face. "I'm still in my house. The dogwood tree Carol planted is blooming again this spring, right on schedule. I tend the garden myself now. I make my own coffee every morning. Dark roast, no one else touches it. I see Dr. Callahan every 6 weeks, and my cognitive function tests are what she calls, frankly, excellent for any age. The clonazepam and whatever else was in my system cleared out over the first few weeks after I stopped taking anything Shauna gave me. The fog lifted so completely, so fast, that I sometimes find it hard to believe how thoroughly I had accepted that it was just aging, just grief, just what happened when you got old and your wife died. That's the thing they count on. They count on you accepting the story they're writing about you. I didn't sleep well for months after it was over. Not from fear, but from going over the timeline, how long it took me to notice, how many mornings I'd drunk that coffee, how many evenings I'd taken those pills, how Abby had seen it before I did, had been carrying that knowledge alone at 7 years old, terrified to say the wrong thing to the wrong person. I think about what would have happened if she hadn't pressed that note into my hand. I don't let myself think about it too long. Here's what I want to say. To anyone listening who's in their 60s or 70s and has family members who've moved in to help, pay attention to the small things. Who handles your mail? Who pours your coffee? Who turns away when they set out your medication? When someone offers to help, that's one thing. When someone starts making decisions for you without asking, about your kitchen, your schedule, your future, that's a different thing entirely. And if people around you start saying you're confused, you're forgetful, you're not yourself, get yourself to a doctor you chose, not one they recommended. Get blood work. Get a cognitive assessment. Get eyes on your own bank statements directly, not through anyone else. Trust what you remember about yourself, not what someone else tells you you've become. If you're a child or a grandchild and something feels wrong in a house, if an adult you love seems dimmer than they used to be, slower, more uncertain, pay attention to that. You might be right, and it might matter more than you know. Abby came for Thanksgiving. I did not make the turkey. I ordered it from a place downtown already cooked, and we ate it at the kitchen table, just the two of us and Pam, and it was the best meal I can remember since Carol was alive. Abby ate 2 full plates and then sat back in her chair with the satisfied look of a person who has no more worries in the world, and for one afternoon, neither did I. The dogwood will bloom again in April. I'll be there to see it. I keep coming back to one moment. Not the garage, not the documents, not even the phone call telling me they'd been arrested. I keep coming back to Abby lying awake in the dark, eyes open, waiting to see if I'd come back from that garage. 7 years old, carrying something that heavy. Alone. What happened to me didn't happen because Shauna was some kind of monster who appeared out of nowhere. It happened in steps, small ones. A reorganized shelf, a cup of coffee handed to me with a smile, a pill set out on a nightstand by someone who had already decided I was too old to notice the difference. Each step was small enough that I accepted it. And then one day I was a man who couldn't remember what he'd had for breakfast, sitting at his own kitchen table listening to people talk about his future like he wasn't in the room. That's the thing about losing your clarity slowly. You don't notice it going. You just notice that the world has gotten harder to hold on to. And if someone is the reason your world is getting harder, and that same person is also the one telling you it's your fault, you start to believe them. That's not stupidity. That's just what happens when you trust the wrong person and stop trusting yourself. What I understand now, looking back, is that what saved me wasn't luck. It was a chain of choices made by people who had every reason to stay quiet and didn't. Abby chose to say something when she could have convinced herself she'd misunderstood. She's a child. The adults around her had authority and explanations and the benefit of the doubt. She had a piece of folded paper and the courage to press it into my hand anyway. That kind of moral clarity, knowing what's right even when it costs you, even when you're small and scared, doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from paying attention to your conscience and deciding it matters more than your comfort. Raymond didn't have to move as fast as he did. Dr. Callahan didn't have to stay late to run that cognitive screen. Detective Albright didn't have to shield the evidence before Shauna could reach it. Each of them used their knowledge and their judgment in the right direction. Intelligence without conscience is just a sharper tool for doing harm. What they had was both the skill to understand what was happening and the integrity to act on it. Then me. I had to decide at 68 years old, foggy and grieving and doubting everything I thought I knew about my own mind, to get up from that bed at midnight and go look. Nobody made me do that. I could have told myself Abby was confused. I could have told myself I was too tired, too uncertain, too old to fight. But something in me, The part that still knew who I was before all of it refused to stay down. That refusal, quiet as it was, changed everything. The dogwood Carol planted is going to bloom again this spring. I'll be there to see it. That's not nothing. That's everything.